Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our Ansira IQ series. We are now in part 6. If you have been joining us this whole time, can you believe it? We are here. Promise you can binge watch all of this afterwards. Super exciting. So today our topic is modern MarTech and AI disruption, shaping the marketer of tomorrow. Joining me today is David Russell. He's our SVP of Marketing Technology. He has spent 20 years leading MarTech transformation programs for Fortune 100 companies. He heads up MarTech strategy, platforms, and operations teams to deliver omnichannel experiences, enables personalization, streamline processes, and consolidates technology for faster speed to market. We're going to get back to David in a second, but I didn't want to assume that you knew everything we do here at Ansira. So here's a little bit about us. Ansira here is, our all-in-one distributed marketing platform designed to unify and empower brands and their partner networks to win, bringing everything together in one synchronized motion. Now, you can say goodbye to fragmented data, siloed operations, and disconnected technology when you have a platform powered by 4 powerful modules, and they address every aspect of channel marketing all under one roof. Next slide, please. For today, here's a little bit more about all of the modules. I'm not going to go into all of them, but we have create, incent, attract, and connect. Powering all of this as well is our Ansira X function. Now, this is our services. This is where we have a lot more industry-leading CRM and loyalty and full funnel media management capabilities. And this all operates either independently or in conjunction with our Ansira brand to local platform. Specifically for today, we are going to be focusing in within Ansira X on our MarTech strategy and our solutions. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it on over to David and take it away.
Thanks, Marilyn. Yeah, just a little background on myself. So obviously David Russell, SVP of Marketing Technology. Just looking back at my career, I've just had this unique opportunity of kind of working in the 3 main areas. I worked on the vendor side when I worked at IBM for a number of years building software. I spent about 17 years on the consulting side, starting in CRM, moving to one-to-one personalization, and then eventually into MarTech. I worked for Merkle during that time, leading up kind of the personalization strategy practice there. And on the other side, I've worked on the client side. So I was VP of MarTech at Comcast for a number of years, like I said, leading up MarTech and personalization platforms. It's kind of interesting through the time in consulting. I've kind of built up this view of what I call the MarTech ecosystem. It's all the different components that make that up. And we're going to see kind of the latest evolution of that and how, let's just say, AI really disrupted that space. But before AI came in, there was this idea that the different MarTech platforms, or we're going to call them CRM and AdTech and all these different tools, were starting already to converge before that. Then what came along was AI, kind of hit right in the middle of that, kind of like a meteor, and really, I don't know if shook it up, but it just changed the dynamics going on in that space. We're going to talk about the moment of truth. We're going to use a couple examples of this. The moment of truth is that point in time when you realize that things have changed and forever, and you can't go back to doing things the way that you had, and you have to adjust to it or not, but ideally you adjust to it. There's some analysis that I did here during this point because I had that moment of truth in my career. And I went out and did a lot of research, found out what has changed in this space and where this is going, talked to a lot of leading edge companies in this space, and started defining up what the marketer of the future is. The teams that I ran were like platform teams, marketing operations teams, reporting right up to the marketing structure and organizations. And of all this, I think AI is really impacting that space quite a bit. So, but before we get there, I'm going to start with a story I like to tell. It's really interesting because for me, the big moment for this latest AI disruption was January 2023. OpenAI had released ChatGPT. This is when I had first heard of it. And it had 100 million users after 2 months. So it had been released 2 months earlier. And that was just like incredible adoption. I'm sure during 2023, a lot of people came and connected with the idea or tried out ChatGPT and actually saw that this is more than just hype. There's something real here. But the really interesting thing is that there's a precursor to this. And like I followed this story before the ChatGPT era. And back in like March 2016, I don't know how many people are familiar with AlphaGo, but it's essentially it's a computer that was out there that could play the game of Go against humans, against other computers, or however you want to do it. In the past, there was, I remember Kasparov playing was a Deep Blue IBM, and then there's the IBM machine playing in Jeopardy. But this one is a really interesting story. It's documented quite well. I'll give you some links to things at the end on it. But it's interesting. So as a computer scientist, where I came out of, we like to solve problems in a particular way. The best way is this thing that we call kind of a brute force mechanism. So the game of chess, for example, is a limited game. It's got 32 pieces, it's got 64 squares on the board, and there's actually only so many moves and combinations that can be done. A computer scientist likes deterministic ways of solving problems. So what we'd like to do is just calculate every possible combination and just exhaustively compute it all. And when you do that, what ends up happening is there's no more question to the game. It's what we call a solved game. Now, today, chess is not a solved game. It's not one where we've calculated every combination of moves, but it will, with the technology we have over time, when computers get faster at the rate that they're getting, it will eventually be a solved game, and this is one in that category. Now, Go is another game. And in Asia, it's actually very similar to the game of chess. It's this intellectual game that people will play. There are people who do it professionally, and we're going to talk about that in a second. But if you look at the board, it's a lot more combinations and options than in the game of chess. A lot more squares, a lot more pieces. People will say like there are more move combinations in the game of Go than all the atoms in the universe. Like it's just so huge. And even if computing went the way it was going to in our world, it'll never be a solved game. There's no way that the technology can compute every one of those combinations of moves. So what we rely on is something called deep learning in this space. Essentially, it uses something which is like neural networks, which essentially finds patterns in games and that because we can't actually solve every possible combination in a game. And this deep learning is the same thing that's behind ChatGPT and which kind of leans that system forward. So the interesting thing is if we look at how AlphaGo was going and computing games in when it was playing, what it ends up doing, first of all, is loading all the games that it has out there. So it has all the human games, hundreds of thousands of games that have been recorded out there and loads them all in. The next thing that it does is it actually figures out, hey, who am I going to play? Like I'm going to play a certain player or a certain style or whatever. And then it actually plays against itself in this. So it actually does what we call mass simulation in this sort of situation to create more things that didn't actually happen. They weren't games that were played by people, but they're games that could have been played by people. And by applying the kind of deep learning in here, what AlphaGo does essentially is it for every particular move in the game, it goes and looks back at the history of all the games that were played and all the games that it played and says, what if I put a piece on this spot on the board? What's the likelihood that I'm going to win the game based on all these other games and outcomes? And it would do this over and over. And you can kind of see on the chart, there's like a 50.46 on the side there. And essentially, this is how AlphaGo goes and calculates what the next thing to do. If you actually look at what it's doing, it's actually calculating essentially the next move and the next move and the next move after that, which is actually very similar to how ChatGPT works. When you talk to it, it constructs a sentence by constructing the next word and the next word and the next word in it. So very similar type of model. What I love about this is like 7 years before ChatGPT. And this is kind of like the human interaction kind of dealing with this kind of system out there. So what ended up happening is Lee Sedol he's an 18-time Go champion. So he'd be the equivalent of I don't know, Roger Federer or Tom Brady. Is someone who's just won a lot in the industry. And there was a tournament that happened in March 2016 back in Seoul, South Korea. And you can kind of see this was a massive, massive media event, televised on television, went over multiple days. And AlphaGo was actually owned by Google, bought DeepMind. And you can kind of, you see, Sergey Brin on the side there. And, this was like the huge event. And so it was kind of funny. There was a lot of interviews and all this in advance. And Lee Sedol, when he went, he thought he was going to win every game. That there's no way that computers could have the ingenuity to compete at this level. And I don't think it was all drama. Like I think he legitimately believed it. And when he played, he lost 4 games, won 1 game. And the part that's actually really interesting is that he did win 1 game there in this. And They did an analysis, and there was one point in that game where he played a piece in a particular spot. And they did some analysis after the fact to say, wow, that was actually a strange move. That's a move that maybe 1 in 10,000 humans would ever have made. And it's actually quite telling in this situation because if you know anything about models and AI, it's really domain focused, right? So it has an area that it focuses on and is really good. You put it outside of it, and you're surprised how maybe not great it is in those spaces. And so by this, essentially, Lee Sedol played a non-human move in the game, and the game started to kind of break down. And it's just interesting in that spot. Um, Following up after this, Lee Sedol essentially gave up playing the game of Go. And his reasoning was he didn't like how all the players out there were now focusing their game on playing AI as opposed to other humans and trying to find strategies to beat that system. And he thought that wasn't the purpose of the game of Go, and that it was about, playing people and expanding that way. There was another match that ended up happening. This is Kaji. He was actually ranked number 1 in the world, where Lee Sedol is like the classic champion. This was the best player in the world at the time. And so AlphaGo played him 1 year later in Wuzhen, China. And I'm going to show you some slides here. But it's kind of interesting. I really like this picture because he kind of looks amused from my perspective at what's going on in the game. But you're going to kind of see like the change in tone that goes on as he starts playing this computer. The next one I'll just kind of leave and you can kind of interpret your own what's going on. And anyway he ends up losing every game in this one, and it was extremely crushing for him. Like he was the best in the world, and after this one, you know, he goes and says, "I'm not going to play anymore. Like I'm not going to play a computer ever again in my life." And he had this quote out there, and it was interesting. But he actually changed his mind, and that's what I call this the moment of truth, right? He comes back and realizes things have changed. I can't continue on in this way. In the moment of truth, again, when you realize that what I'm doing just doesn't work anymore, right? And he actually felt that Go was actually teaching people to play Go, AlphaGo, like on another level that they hadn't been in the past, and that we need to learn from it. And you can kind of see the two different approaches of that moment of truth. Lee Sedol actually gave up playing Go at that point. Kaji actually same thing, and this is that moment of truth when you kind of like reject it in some way. But he actually came back and said, "No, this is the right way we need to be going. I mean, this is good. It's going to teach us things." And I'm going to come back to a moment for me. So the next part here is to get into the first part of the conversation, and we're gonna come back to that AlphaGo thing later on in the conversation. But the MarTech convergence is what's going on. So again, I spent my time here, kind of like drawing up different views of how this is together. I try to get this for like executive presentment to show them how you've got these different components. You've got data components. You've got content, and then from that content and data, you create experiences for customers. But you need to get that in front of them and then you've got to, get it to the channels. You want feedback in this system. And ideally, you're going to see there's a lot of components in here. We need to automate that in a way, because if it's just manual tasks, then you're going to have some challenges. So I'm going to go through this. I'm just going to tell you, I believe this is like the Rosetta Stone of the MarTech ecosystem, but let's start with the data component. So the data component, obviously, we're talking things like customer profile, which is like things about the customer, behavioral triggers, which are things the customer did, or signals or events, like things that they actually did. They bought something, they used something, and AI models, which are traditionally kind of predictive models here that are predicting the likelihood to buy, the likelihood to use, the likelihood to churn. There's the data that comes in there. You often are pitching messages that are offers that come from a product catalog. So there might be products at price points that you're trying to pitch here. You create audiences from that data that we talked about on the side. And the great invention of the customer data platform is really brilliant because what it does is allows you to consolidate all the data into one place so that all your different channels go to one place instead of separately going out and getting the data. You can create your audiences in one place and share it out organizationally instead of, again, having different audiences for your website versus your email versus your call center. And then obviously at the bottom, you got your reporting and analytics that come out of it. The second part here is the content. This is one that AI just impacted. In my original charts, I didn't have content in here, but with generative AI and generating creative and copy, honestly, this has changed everything. It now is easier to get a lot of content into the system. And why isn't this MarTech? There's technology in here. It feeds into our messaging and it makes logical sense. So again, creative copy, templates, brand libraries, which are really important, and prototyping tools. From there, we have these two things are more traditional MarTech, the DAM, the Digital Asset Manager Content Management System. The DAM stores the assets. The content management system serves up the assets. So when you go to a website, the content management system is pulling from the DAM to show the resources on the website. For me, my career, when I said worked in personalization and did a lot in this space, this is kind of like where I came out of, but over time learned kind of more the whole ecosystem. I call this the experience layer. This is where you're creating those things for customers, specific and unique to them. You've got your campaign management, journey management. A next best action is when you're arbitrating across, hey, I could talk to them about four different things. What should I talk to them about? Creative optimization. Okay, I've got a message. Now, how do I get that across to a customer? Do I show them a picture of a cat or a dog or the beach or the Eiffel Tower? Like what type of message is going to get across with them from a visual perspective? Orchestration, message orchestration would be what time should I send the message? What channel should I send it through? Is it in emails and some SMS? Should I send it at 7 o'clock at night or 10 o'clock in the morning? That's very particular to individuals. Everyone thinks it stops there, but to me, the underestimated part is the delivery part. You now have to connect those tools into all your channels. Web and mobile have these things called SDKs, which are just connectors. If you go into like Facebook or you need these social type connectors, an email service provider needs to send messages, an SMS gateway, print vendors. You get the idea that to get to the channel, these tools need to connect and fill in that gap. Down at the bottom, you've got the feedback, which is important for two things, right? One, so that we can get reporting and analytics to see how things performed. But those models, remember those AI needs to learn by the outcomes. If it doesn't get the outcomes, it can't actually learn. And then work automation, like look at all these components here. It's a lot, and you can manually hand off these tasks from one person to the next. You can talk to each other through Outlook or Teams or whatever, Slack, whatever tools that you're using. But the reality is you need to get these automated. And we're going to talk a bit more about that a little later because what's happening for the first time here, it's not just that we're going to be A/B testing messages to customers or what creative using like an Adobe Target or something like that. What we're going to be doing is A/B testing technology. When AI comes into this space, you're going to be doing different tools in campaign management and journey management and audience generation and things like that. And you have your existing tools and your new tools because a lot of the tools that are coming aren't even here yet, or they're in the really early stages. And you got to be able to plug and play. And without that automation across there, it's going to be tricky to do that. So that's kind of the basis and the framework there. My observation, these terms, CRM, MarTech, AdTech, sales tech, content, e-commerce, it's all converging. If you look at it, it makes sense. They started out in different places, like CRM with that one-to-one communications. Yeah, there were emails you could send to customers. MarTech, mass communications, but there's an email service provider there also sending emails. Do you need two email service providers in your company? What about the content side of things? There's content in MarTech. There's content in AdTech, and we're talking like creative or copy or different words. Do you need duplicative systems doing that? No, we need it all to flow in. But what I've been noticing is that this is all flowing under the umbrella of MarTech. It seems to be the word that the industry is landing on. So the word MarTech is becoming that bigger umbrella overarching all of that. So I'm going to talk next here quickly about the AI disruption. Okay, and this is really big kind of part of the process here. That convergence was going on well before ChatGPT and that OpenAI thing came into the system, probably more around that time. Remember when we were talking about the AlphaGo example around there? So there's the ecosystem that we talked about. And I'm going to talk about something that particularly happened to me in a past life. And it's the one that really kind of shook me, my moment of truth, as we talked about. I owned these components where I was. And it was pretty much all the experience tools, the CDP, the ability to create audiences, and all the outbound channels. I influenced other channels, but this is the one that I had complete control in. And one day, somebody in the data and analytics team had come over to me and he said, "Hey, David, this is what's going on here. Like, I've taken the customer profile, we've got this behavioral trigger, we're putting it into an AI model. For example, if a customer goes to the website and searches for termination fees, right? It's a churn risk, right? Well, maybe we put them into an AI model that says, yes, it is a churn risk. And if it is, we go and send a message to the customer. And I was saying, like, you've already done this. This is already out there. It's like, yeah, yeah. And then I said, where'd you get the email service provider from? They're like, oh, we went to the IT organization who does service messaging and used their tool to kind of send this message out. And I'm going to tell you, my first response to this was, you can't do that. This is a marketing messaging that you're sending out, and you're not talking to marketing or marketing operations, right? You bypassed, in another way, $15 million of technology here, and sent this message out. And this is for me, though, uh, like I said, the first response is, no, you can't do this. This isn't right. This isn't the way it works. But then the second thing is take a look at this objectively of what's going on here. What they actually did is took a customer action and sent, I'm going to say, a personalized message to a customer. Like, I can't argue this isn't a personalized message. Like, the customer did something, and we sent them a message about that thing that they did that is very relevant to it. And so that really got me thinking, like, you know, what is, this is my moment of truth, right? Like, what is the purpose of marketing operations here? What's the purpose of marketing? If AI can actually go do this, like, what's going on here? And you could say, well, it's a little more complicated than that. If you looked at that example that we talked about, it's not every channel, it's just one channel. It's not, doing the creative optimization or whatever. It's not doing that's not super personalizing. But the point is a valid one. That is a personalized measure that didn't need humans, that the four would have 100% gone through my team in order to do that. And were we really needed in that process? So this kind of kicked off the process for me of going out. With my consulting career, I've worked with a lot of companies, and so I reached out to people I knew at McKinsey, at Merkle, Accenture, Slalom, Len 360, a few vendors that are also out there, and just said, guys, what's going on? This just happened. Like, and I showed them this. Like, where is this going? Clearly, this isn't the big generative AI that we're talking about. That's more the predictive type AI, but it's really impacting me in my job, and we need to get a grip on this. We were running an RFP at this time too on like what technology to move forward on, and I actually paused that RFP in this moment till I could get some answers because to make sure we're asking the right questions going into that RFP. And what changed, is what we're going to talk about. So this is what I came out of those conversations with everybody. So number one is just to understand the types of artificial intelligence that are out there. The first one is predictive AI. And predictive AI is the ability to predict the future of something. This is likelihood to buy, use, click on an ad, like I say, churn. Traditional, this is not new. This has been around. Like, I worked with this back in 2009 and all the way up. I mean, it's notoriously, it depends on how good your data is that comes into it, to how good those predictions are. But that's been around for a while. The ChatGPT area created generative AI. This is creating new content. So even when you're talking to ChatGPT and something comes back, really what we're doing is creating something new. That conversation that ChatGPT gives back to you is brand new. It's not anything that existed before. It's taking from information that existed, but it's actually creating that in the moment. And it's also for types of creative or like copy, subject line. It's just creating these sorts of things. That's the one that everybody, I think, focuses on. But the one that's becoming bigger and bigger is this agentic AI. Okay. And there's two parts. Agentic is just the interface that you deal with when you're talking to like a chat GPT, right? When you say, tell me, whatever question you're going to ask in there. That conversational way of talking is actually an agent. So you're actually talking to the computer instead of it just doing something that's been programmed. You're actually telling it in the moment, can you do this for me? And it comes back, right? Agentic AI is slightly different, which is that area around running on its own. It's autonomous. You know what I mean? You're not actually telling it to do things. It kind of knows enough about you and your business and what you're doing and running on yourself on its own. For example, imagine you had a party or something, invited 10 people. Uh, in an agentic AI world, the AI would come back to you and say, "Hey, I saw you had this party. I sent thank you notes to the 10 people there, just so you know." You didn't ask it to do that. It just went and kind of knew it should do that and came back. And these are the three main things that came out of that conversation. These are the areas that are there. I believe there's a fourth one that's coming. It's quantum, and we're going to hear about that in a little bit. But that's time for like another conversation. So when I go back and look at this situation that happened here, In this situation, it looked like it was all cut out and eliminated. But if you look at it, we need these things. A journey management tool would definitely be helpful. The creative optimization, the right time to send a message, right? Having these assets come out of a dam instead of like some sort of more rigid system. But really, what's going to go on in the future is that agentic thing that I talked about is going to replace this. Like agentic is going to be running this on your behalf. So it's kind of interesting to see it philosophically here. This whole area looked like it disappeared. It's really just going to get automated, and we'll talk more about that. So the AI impact specifically on MarTech. So which components or what type of things are going to be impacted? Number one, the content. I'm sure everybody's seeing this with all the images and creation that's coming out of that. We're talking creative and copy. Those are the two big ones, subject line on emails. But those are the two big things that are getting generated at scale. Instead of having a couple dozen variants, you're going to have hundreds, thousands. You could be able to personalize that at an individual level. This generated audiences. Today, you create audiences. You might put them into, like I say, an Adobe Target and see which audiences are working or performing better. This one is going to be creating them and saying, hey, you should try out these sorts of audiences. The next part, and this was the part that companies were at the time definitely barely thinking about. They were thinking about the content and audiences, but the actual generating of the campaigns. And it's just interesting to see that this has really come to life. If you've seen like the latest releases by a lot of companies in this space, that you actually say, generate me a campaign that does A, B, and C. You know what I mean? And then it actually puts out the elements onto the canvas for you. You go and can tweak it, but the hard part of like dragging and dropping and drawing and clicking on things is done for you. And that's a big time saver. Those are going to be driven by agents. Each one of those, you're going to say, generate me content that looks like A, B, and C, generate me an audience that's something like this, generate me a campaign that uses this content in this audience, right? Like that. But there's some runtime parts that's the design side. But now that we have all this content, we need to figure out what's the right creative for the customer or what's the right subject line, like we were talking about. Like, how do we get that? And then the other part, and we're going to talk about this because this is really bigger in marketing than I thought, the two-way conversation, that kind of AI chat, where you're going to be chatting back and forth, not necessarily with a human chat or a basic chatbot, but like these fairly intelligent GPTs that come back and kind of have conversations with you and are moving the process forward. And you can kind of see here that content optimization is something we've actually been doing for years. That's using predictive AI. The two-way conversation, that's the generative AI. And you kind of see those three concepts we talked earlier. But the bigger thing is what you're going to have is an agent over all of this. So it's almost like you have an agent that's a supervisor or a manager over these other agents. Um, and what it means is that, like I said earlier, you're going to say, generate me a campaign that's, for these types of people with this type of content and optimize it for the right people. All right. So probably the biggest surprise out of the analysis, like the other part probably could have looked at the MarTech ecosystem and had a good guess where AI was going to come, but this one isn't obvious, that the channels have changed. And channels are those delivery mechanisms, right? We have the three main areas: digital, right, which is like your websites, social media, things that they're not necessarily involving humans, but there's some sort of interaction going on there. You've got your outbound channels, which are like we're sending you a message. You've got your email, SMS, mobile push, direct mail, that area, and then your assisted or human-facing channels, your call center, your retail, agents, technicians, that are there. And you know what? This is the way it's been for the last 25 years, as far as I know. And companies have really hardened down and built these silos. And the bigger your company is, the harder those silos are. You've got digital teams, you've got outbound teams, you've got assisted. Okay. Two things have really changed here. One, pretty much all these channels are digital now, right? So everything's just digital by default. So calling out something in that way is a little different. But the assisted one is interesting because even again, before the ChatGPT thing, this idea of having a natural language processing listening next to you on your call was part of what's coming. It's now being replaced with those kind of ChatGPT interfaces. And even if you're talking to a human, that human is interacting with a ChatGPT on the side. But the one that really shook me here was when that person had come to me before about saying the email. Remember, that kind of bypassed the whole system. What they're really coming for, and the person was not nefarious in any way, he's just trying to get things done. He said, David, I don't know how to send an SMS. I can only send an email. Like, how do I send that? But he didn't call it SMS. He called it SMS and the name of our chatbot, you know. And that was really interesting. I'm like, what is that? And so I started doing some research. Is this something that's a thing? And it's like, yeah, what we're going to do is in SMS, we're going to put, our version of ChatGPT under that, and we're going to be talking back and forth with customers. And the brilliant part of this is it's like an app that's on everyone's phone. Most companies have to have people install their whatever app for their whatever company you want to deal with, but you don't have to install text messaging. It's default on every message. And if you could imagine that instead of it just saying press one to do this or answer yes, you're actually having back and forth conversations. It's almost like you've got a built-in app on everybody's phone. So then that led me to say, well, which channels are going to become conversational, right? Obviously, we know the human-facing ones that we talked about, but that SMS is now going to be a back and forth sort of thing. Could an email be considered conversational? Usually it's send it and says do not reply on the top, but imagine you could reply and you're now interacting with ChatGPT in that way. It's like, okay, that one makes sense. Imagine on a website, the banner that you click on, instead of just taking you someplace else, it starts talking to you. It's like, it's interesting that you can see the trend of where this is going in IVR, right? When you're on the phone saying, press one to do this, press two. Yeah, that can definitely be conversational. So what ends up happening is that these kind of traditional silos start changing and they actually turn into two. They turn into conversational AI or non-conversation. This is where it's going. And the trouble I'm seeing is if you're stuck in these silos of these three types of channels, I mean, this is like consolidating in a way that, I mean, it's going to be a challenge. So what this, I'm just trying to get like what this is saying is like a lot of these things are going to be going through these chat GPT type conversations. And we'll talk about that in a second. But really a good way to think of this is it's going from clicks to conversations. And somebody had mentioned this to me, and I just love this thing. So in the past, you go order a pizza online, right? And what would happen in that situation is you have a lot of drop downs. I want a pizza, I want half of it pepperoni, I want it large or whatever. You have to do all these drop downs. And here you're just going to type it in and just say, give me a pizza that's whatever. So it was interesting. I was at a conference and I was presenting some of this type of material. And an hour before that, I was talking with somebody at one of those consulting companies and just saying like I keep hearing this thing that like the browser is dead or like digital is dead or like and I'm like what does that mean like and he said, hey, come here, take a look, and he showed me this and I took some screenshots in this conversation. He said this is um, uh, I mean this is Edge, Microsoft Edge, but this is Copilot within there. And he says it looks like the browser, but it's not. It's really a GPT or like a chat GPT type interface in here. And he said, look at this. And he wrote it. He says, let me go find a mushroom risotto recipe and order it from Walmart in whatever town. And this is coming back through essentially, the chat GPT type interface. Not only does it show it, you can click one button and go to Instacart and buy it. And what drop downs did you do? You didn't do anything. You could probably say now add in some ingredient if you had it or not. But just anyway, just wanted to show you like this is the example of where things are going. Everything is going to this conversational. I don't think websites are dead. I don't think mobile is dead, but the monopoly that they've had or growth in that space is going to reduce, and this thing is coming up, and this is going to be the interface in a lot of areas. So what are we seeing and what does this all mean? From the one side, there's just a shift in how the resources. Today, there's a lot of people who have to go in the canvases of, Salesforce Marketing Cloud or Braze or Zeta or Adobe Campaign or whatever and drag and drop boxes. Well, that's all kind of going to be changing. With the automation, the shift is going to be more towards strategy as a lot of that functionality is going to be automated. You're going to type in what you do, and a lot of that work, which spent literally hours to draw up, will spit out for you. You don't just take it, but you got to go and look at it. So this leads me to the marketer of the future. And what's the conclusion out of all this? So these are the types of things that you're going to be, looking at. Number one, delegating the operational tasks to agentic AI, right? So you're going to go in these agents, and at this point, it's just agentic where you're going to type it in, but eventually it will go to agentic AI. This is creating audiences, creating campaigns, generating your content, that's going to go there. This is the big one. Instead of going and spending your time moving things on a canvas, you're going to be monitoring and approving. So things are going to be coming through. You're going to have to say, yep, that's good, that's not good, but there's going to be so much content that you can't do it for all of it. So you're going to be spot checking some of it. But more importantly, you're looking at the outcomes. You're looking at the reports and what's coming out of your experiments and whatever at the other side and saying, this is working and not working. And then you have to follow up with that. back to the AI and say, can you fix this or look into this? We'll find something that fills the gap over here. Or why is this not performing, right? So, omni-channel vision. I believe right now AI is really good at the individual one, like send an email or do a banner ad. But the omni-channel, or that experience that a customer is having across all of that, I think is really important. Experimental mindset. I mentioned this earlier. That ecosystem chart I saw, you're going to be plugging and playing technologies and little players in that space. You've got to just have that thing. Like, let's try out something new. Sounds cool. Let me look at it. Let's, have that critical mind to it. AI model stewardships. Remember, these models, they only learn from what you give it. So you got to give it not just good data, you got to give it your brand, the idea of what your company is about. You got to give it the right outcomes. You're teaching these models, so it's on you to make sure that it's got the right inputs, ethical standards, check out for things for bias, data privacy, compliance. Just checking that those things are going on. And this is what I talked to somebody that was a CTO at one of the companies, a large company. I said, if you were to say, what's one of the future things? And they said, balancing hyper personalization with brand integrity. And what they're trying to say is, we want to empower all the branches or whatever to be able to build their own content, but they also have to stay within the brand guidelines. But what are you doing? There's so much content that we can't check it all. How do we almost automate that brand compliance part of the process? And just finally, the key skills here that we're talking about, critical thinking, I can't say enough. Don't just take what AI says. Don't just take the output of a chat GPT or your campaign and just pump it out the door. Go and try it out. You know what I mean? Look at it, read it, and make sure that it is right. Check the details. Curiosity. There's new things coming. You're not going to be able to stop it. It's actually kind of fun. There's a lot of cool things out there. Like, go check what they do. Collaboration. There are different teams in your organization. This automation is going to hit all of them. But let's just say the marketing team in your organization is used to these tools. Maybe the paid and social media not as used to it. Like, work together on this and help people out. And you're collaborating with AI also. It's a back and forth. It's not just a take it. Going back to that AlphaGo situation, resiliency. You're going to hit a wall. You're going to hit something that's really going to blow up your world. But just take it, move on and just say, I get it. It's here. There's going to be a little grieving period in there, but you're going to go through and you get to that point. And then the final one, and I can't emphasize it enough, is just the empathy. I mean, these things are a trillion times smarter than us. Okay. These models, and they're not conscious. Okay. They don't have empathy, you do, right? And if it doesn't have empathy, you need to provide that oversight for it, right? Like, these models are in your company and you own it and you control it, right? So, but like, you have an impact here to make sure that you've got that covered. Just wrapping up the final thing. I find that humans are always very, very resilient. They're actually very good at moving. Like, look now, on everybody uses mobile phones from every age group. Go look at like the internet. Like, just things get used and then standardized, and we use them all the time. Always be learning, but always be unlearning. This is the tough part. People are not so great at stopping to do things that they did before. Um, this is things that you've been doing for years. All of a sudden, something's changed here. Like, hey, I've been dragging these boxes and I know this tool. It's like, there's a better way. Um, but these are things that you've learned in the last year, and in these cycles, are going to come up like that. And it's interesting. But again, somebody had mentioned this to me, and I just love this analogy because it is the unlearning that's the hard part. And just recommended readings. Going to wrap this up. AI Snake Oil. Just, this is a great book on AI. Isn't the be all and everything, end all of everything. Specifically, that predictive AI has had a lot of challenges. Just be aware that AI isn't perfect. Generative and agentic is really cool stuff. This other one is a bit peripheral here, but I think is a great read. It's called Middle Tech. Both of these are from Princeton Press here. And it's just fascinating, the idea that we've gotten into the culture of, hey, good enough. It's good enough. Don't let, good enough get in the way of perfection. It's like, no, good enough isn't good enough anymore. Like, there's a change here. And this is the dynamic between management and programmers, and that changing parameters can cause defects. But anyway, the last one's AlphaGo. You can go on YouTube and watch this. I strongly recommend it. It's the Lee Sedol part of the thing. It's just fascinating to see his perspective and just his reactions to things. It's hard. It hit him really hard. and hit Kijiji really hard too. And that's a story. So wrapping up Q&A, I hand it back over to Marilyn and go from there.
Yeah, thank you so much, David. That was really great, super insightful. I can speak, as a marketer myself, been doing content marketing for years, and the unlearn for me was absolutely content generation. Like in the very beginning, it was okay, this thing's kind of writing, and then over time, like, oh no, it's really writing, and um, redoing processes, revisiting just protocols that I've been raised to do my whole life, and now I'm like, got to revisit these, got to revisit how I do things and get work done. So
Yeah.
you really summed it up perfectly. So completely agree with you. We do have some pre-submitted questions that we are going to be going through. So if you have any other questions from what David just shared, feel free to drop them in the chat. We do have that time built in today. But I'm going to go ahead and get started here for us. So first submitted question. What tools make sense for a small versus a large brand?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because the more I think about this, like, and you gave this to me yesterday, and I'm still processing this one because do you mean like which tools or which companies? You know what I mean? Because there's a difference there. Like when I showed that ecosystem chart, pretty much any company who's trying to do a modern marketing is going to have every one of those components. But the question is, like, what tool set do I use? Like, are you saying, like, do I need a CDP or do I need a journey tool? Like, yes, you need all of those tools. But there's a difference between these larger companies like an Adobe and a Salesforce, which have lots of components and broad depth. And large companies kind of like that place to go to get comprehensive solutions. But the other part is the trade-off. There's a lot of great, I'm going to say, newer players like Braze and Zeta and Bloomreach in the space who are kind of like all-in-one tools. These larger tools are meant for like you could use like an Adobe, but you could stitch in other tools really easily. But if you buy like a tool like a Braze or something, it's got a CDP, it's got a campaign tool, it's got a journey manager, it's got reporting, it's got that all in one space. So you lose a little bit on the ability to plug in other things like within that, but outside you can. Like if you have another component, you can kind of use it. But then your users don't have to flip the multiple tools, right? So like I don't mean to hedge the bets here, but like the big tools are really good at dealing with really complicated like data systems, like where your data that can't really change to get it into there. So there's a place for that. But then if you look at the user's experience, they have to flip the different tools, right? And then these kind of
Mhm.
medium-sized tools are there that have that all-in-one experience, but maybe you lose a little flexibility on the data, but you have more, for your people to do. But it was interesting because the idea of a large and a small brand is kind of funny because actually large companies are small brands too, in a way, if you think about it, because the large companies are, gigantic, but 85% of them use like, through channel marketing, like they use retailers or, partners or dealers or whatever to sell their products. And those are actually using technology on a smaller scale. So you could see in some companies the B2C using like an Adobe or Salesforce, and then something down like the Ansira product is obviously tailored to that type of space of dealing with that local communication. But I just find it weird because we talk about big companies, but they're made up of a lot of stores and resellers and things in there. So I don't know if that was a
Very
complete
true.
answer, but a lot of angles to look at.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
it's tough. And whoever submitted that question, if you feel like we didn't answer that appropriately or thoroughly based on your, local or specific scenario, feel free. We're going to have contact info at the end of this. So feel free to rephrase it and resubmit it. And we're happy to address that even further. But I thought that was a great answer. Second question. What do you think is the most important part of the omni-channel MarTech ecosystem?
There's two things that stand out today. One is the customer data platform. If you don't have a CDP, seriously, look at one. What a CDP does is it does a couple of things. It kind of consolidates operational data that you need for your application so that they don't have to go back and get, the website gets data, some other one, and they transform it and change it, and you get different experiences. So you can get data in one place. You can get audiences in one place. So the audiences you're dealing with, again, in one channel are the same in another. It also does a lot of identity stitching in that space, but there's so many variants. There are CDPs that focus on like, identity stitching, some that focus on audiences, some that focus on, behavioral data, optimizing that. So that's a space you probably want to look deeper into. But that one's core because we know how data is important, but getting it into one place is interesting. And if anyone's looking at CDPs, like seriously look at zero copy CDPs, like these composable CDPs, because I know there's challenges with moving data, like at at banks or healthcare companies in particular, and there are solutions to that are coming out. But the other one I can't say enough about is like work automation. Like I really like a tool like Adobe Workfront if you look at like to stitch your things together, because imagine that ecosystem and you pull out a piece. You can't have your system fall apart because you replaced a journey tool with something else or an audience thing with something else. And you need that technology there. Like a lot of important ones, but to me, that one, the Workfront one, is more preparing for AI, and the CDP is just getting your data kind of ready for AI. So there's kind of like an AI angle there. So that's my thought. So
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm a mom, and sometimes it's like, oh, I got to pick a favorite child. What kind of question is that? So I think you handled it great. It depends on where you're at, but the most important part of omnichannel ecosystem, it depends. Final question we have, unless any more come through. If you could only pick one, which type of AI do you think is the most important for brands to leverage? Predictive, generative, or agentic?
yeah, I mean the predictive's been around, and like I say in that book, the one that I pointed out there, there's some challenges in that area. I mean, generative is the one today that's just changing things up. I mean, in the past, for creating content at scale, um, I mean, you need ad agencies, external companies to do this, and now you can actually internalize that, and that's kind of amazing. But it actually goes back with that work automation. You got to automate what we call the content supply chain, which is going from getting the images, getting it through the compliance, prototyping into your DAM, into your CMS, and serving it up. Like that should be seamless, because today, look at the time it takes you to get like 10 messages out. Like that's a lot. Sorry, what's the question again? Can you say it again? What
If you could pick one, which type of AI is the most important for brands to leverage?
Today, clearly generative is the big one. Tomorrow, agentic, because that's the one that's going
Mm-hmm.
to do all the work for you. But we're talking now, definitely generative. So,
Yeah, I agree. That one is the one I've been learning the most myself, and it's been fascinating for sure.
yeah.
Um, Great. I don't think we had any additional questions come through. So thank you, David, for all that. I appreciate it. If you would like to join us in the new year, can you believe it? This is the corny joke where we say, we'll see you next year. I know it's early December, but I'm saying it anyway. See you next year. We'll be tackling our next webinar topic, SEO and AEO for channel marketing brands. What's noise? What's relevant? So we're going to be diving into AI search, AI visibility, AEO, all the things. We will have our own in-house SEO and AEO consultants to be sharing some of their thought leadership at that webinar. So don't miss it. That will be January 22nd. Details to come. Please make sure you've subscribed to our newsletter, and that will be where we send out all the information for the first to know. So that is our next webinar. And finally, again, if you have more questions, if you want to kind of noodle on what David presented today, or just anything that he kind of just sparked you into, like, I need to know, I need to how to automate, I want to know how to integrate generative AI into my organization, get a consult. Book a free MarTech consult today for your organization. Learn how this can help your channel marketing brand kind of, I don't want to say update, but maybe review and rehearse and revisit all the things that your entire tech stack that your company is using, and maybe we can find efficiencies or streamline anything for you within that space. So here's the info for David. Here's also some info on scan the QR code to learn more there. Honestly, David, this was great. Slam dunk. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you everyone for joining us. We're wrapped up here. We're going to see you all next year.